Each life we incarnate into has a divine purpose. For the majority of people on this planet, their purpose has eluded them. We have become so distracted with the struggle to survive that we have forgotten what we are here to do. In alignment with the sacred laws of nature, the ultimate purpose of all existence is to create and evolve. We certainly do not incarnate into life with the intention to destroy. And yet, we have come to live in a very destructive world. As a result, there are many out there who feel lost or adrift, whilst knowing deep down inside that something is very wrong with their reality. Many people wish they could do something of value, anything that is purposeful, instead of having to submit to a system of slavery in order to survive. It is important never to let go of that feeling. That is your soul crying out to you, telling you that your life has value and that you do indeed have a purpose. The most important thing you can do in life is to recognize your purpose, and often that requires a lot of soul searching. Life indeed dishes out some pretty tough challenges, which will either move you closer towards your purpose path, or will give you great training for when you finally realize what it is that you came here to do. But more often than not, the very clues about your life's purpose are hidden in plain sight, woven into the very fabric of our existence. But we are so easily distracted by irrelevant details that don't really matter, that often we miss the very obvious right in front of us. It is because of our willful ignorance of anything that does not fit our preconceived ideas that the truth about the nature of our reality is so readily hidden in plain sight. This is a very deep and personal journey, which has come to be expressed in many aspects throughout my life. This is not just an attempt to retell a bunch of research and pass it off as my own, for I am very grateful and openly acknowledge all the many wonderful people that I have been given the opportunity to work with and to learn from in order to get to the point where I've come to know what I now know. This is a journey I was always destined to go on, and likewise, how I have come to know this information forms as much a part of the story as the information itself.
You're live.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Mel V, and tonight is episode 4 of Dragonology. It is the 9th of April 2015, and the time BST is 9 p.m. and it's 10 p.m. Central European time where I am at the moment. Tonight we're going to dive straight into the heart of matters. We left off last week having gone through much etymology, and I hope some of you have had a chance to revise or at least remember some of it, because we take a very direct line into the dark heart of the beast tonight, and we start that journey at the point of looking at our culture. Now, culture can be defined as the sum of all art forms. There are various ways to approach this particular subject, But myself being an artist and being someone who has always been particularly interested and appreciative of things that fall under culture, in terms of art forms, performing arts, theatre, all sorts. It's been very interesting for myself to go down this journey and discover exactly how rooted our culture is in Dragonology. Being in alternative media, this is something that we've come to know as fact, and that is whoever controls the media controls the culture. And that shouldn't come as much surprise to anybody who is familiar with this information. The simple fact is that media predominantly controls the way most people think and process information. And there's several recognizable tactics which are actually used to do this. And we'll get into that a little bit as we go through the course of tonight's material. Culture is the arts elevated to a set of beliefs. And how are those beliefs controlled? Most certainly through the mainstream media. And it's interesting that I found this particular picture. And of course, for those of you who've been following the course, you'll know that I reference all things to do with dragon etymology, or anything referencing the dragon in purple. Interesting to find the BBC, British Broadcasting Corporation, I beg your pardon, the Bullshit Broadcasting Corporation logo of culture with a purple background. When people talk about culture, many conjure up grandiose ideas about existence. The Oxford scholar, for example, may pride themselves on being cultured, which is typically thought of as a synonym for being polished, sophisticated, elegant, or genteel. Being cultured is popularly thought of or thought to refer to the quality in a person or society that arises from a concern for what is regarded as excellence in arts, letter writing, possessing of manners, and scholarly pursuits. Being cultured is generally seen in the light that is deemed desirable. We loosely throw around terms like popular culture, not realizing how it alludes to dragon influence. Very few people actually speak about culture in its true context, being that of cultivation. Much like a botanist may spend time cultivating a plant, or a scientist may spend time cultivating bacteria in a petri dish, so humanity is being cultivated through culture. The meaning becomes clearer when you start to look at the etymology of the word cult. The word cult was originally used not to describe a bunch of fanatics or religionists, but for the act of worship, ritual, or ceremony. Very important to remember that. It was first used in the 17th century in English, borrowed from the French word culte, which is in turn derived from the Latin word cultus, which is an adjective meaning inhabited, cultivate, or worship. Like bacteria in a petri dish, we are being cultivated by artificial mediums. So basically, what is culture? Culture determines very much the way you think, act, and interact. And much like we've discussed here, the bacteria in the petri dish, which is bacteria grown in an artificial medium in order to maximize impact or for observation. That's very much the way it is with humanity, is that we are in artificial mediums, and media and medium are very similar words, and that isn't by accident. That is because humanity isn't in a natural state. We are so artificially programmed that I think most people don't even know how to connect with what is natural and true, like natural law, for example. It can totally taken out of you. These things which you know innately that come with you in your soul just completely get sort of sidetracked, dumbed down, even washed out of you in a way, but it's never completely gone. We just have to recognize and re-acknowledge these things. But it takes a lot to get rid of that, and that's very much done in an artificial way through artificial mediums. From the moment we are born, our cultivation begins in the form of indoctrination by cultural programming. And as Terence McKenna once said, we are caged by our cultural programming. Cult is a mass hallucination, and when you step outside the mass hallucination, you see it for what it's worth. And of course, Terence McKenna, famous for taking gargantuan portions of psilocybin. Clearly, he got an idea of what it was all about. Cultural programming takes on many forms and comes from all directions, from mainstream education and media, religion, to music, to daily social convention, to our sporting and party culture. It's near enough impossible to escape one form or another of cult programming. The cultist roots and ritual. All cults stem from a common origin, and you need to understand this. All religions stem from a common origin, and all religions involve cult practice, and all cults stem from the same religion roots, which is dragonology, dragon worship, the cult of the dragon. So basically, cult of dragon worship, which is controlled by initiated members who engage in rituals that involve human sacrifice, cannibalism, blood drinking, sodomy, pedophilia, and all manners of extreme behavior. Now, to understand how our culture has evolved out of ritual, one need look no further than, for example, theatre, which, if you have a look, actually has what we spoke about last week, the THE, the or the root word, which references dragons, rulers, or royalty. Okay, so theatre, it's a certain root word, always marked in purple. Now, the other aspects that are rooted in ritual of modern day is, of course, festivals, and festival is another word that has evolved from the word feast. And of course, what do? At these rituals, they feast on blood and sometimes human flesh. But also when they used to sacrifice animals, cook the animal and feast, that's where the whole, lamb and the spit big festivals, medieval feasts, and all that came from. And it normally came around when they had the pagan spring festivals and the solstice festivals and all those things attached with pantheism and ritualism. And of course, music and sport very much came out of ritual as well. And we shall cover off some of those aspects as we go through the course of tonight's material. The ritual roots of theatre. It is commonly taught in mainstream education, I beg your pardon, mainstream indoctrination, that the roots or the origins of theatre is rooted in ritual. Now, just to give you an idea of how true this is, I went through a traditional mainstream indoctrination education process, and I actually took speech and drama as one of my subjects in high school. And every year that we did speech and drama as a subject, there was a part of the module that was specifically theatre history. Every year we learned the same thing always, and that is that theatre is rooted in ritual. And we were taught about ritual as sort of, a rain dance to make the rain come. That was how prosaic the knowledge was that was passed on to us. We never got into what those rituals were. Ironically enough, though, our speech and drama teacher was a Jehovah's Witness. Anyway, interesting. So let's have a look at the etymological roots of some of the words that you find to do with the theatre. And this is where it gets real funky and interesting, because you start to realize exactly what theatre was. And like all things theatre and all media nowadays, it was originally and always intended for the purposes to reach a lot of people at once, because what happens when you reach a lot of people at once? There's a lot of power in that voice that reaches a lot of people at once. and therefore theatre has always been used for the process of propaganda and indoctrination, usually to maintain the status quo or the ruling powers. Some of the interesting words that you, of course, then find turning up in theatre etymology, and I'll go through them. We have write, play, narrate, parable, chorus, and thespian. So let's have a look at what some of these words actually mean. Of course, we took on the etymology roots of write last week, or the week before, when we discussed writ and its root. Okay, so in the word write, as in write with a pen, or in case you're a feather and ink, or perhaps you hack away on your keyboard or typewriter if you're still using one of those. You have the root of rite, as in a ritualistic rite or rite of passage. You, of course, can write, rites in terms of spells, rites in terms of religious rites, traditional rites. This is a very interesting word, and we will get into that as well, because it actually does lead on to what we refer to now as human rights. Very tricksy, those words. Anyway, writ. The writ root is taken from the Arabic classification of dragon, being the ifrit, also known as ifrit, afrit, a malevolent jinn or dragon. So let's look at the word play. Play is etymologically cognitive with parlay, and we spoke about the code of parlay when it comes to pirates in last week's Dragonology. So if you haven't checked that out, go check out last week's and you'll get an idea of what that was all about. Parlay is etymologically cognitive to the word para. Okay, and para is a term which is transliterated from pure and pala, the root of palace. So remember that root that we spoke about last week, pure, pala, and into para. So parlay transliterates into para. Narrate. Okay, now this is where it starts to get a little bit interesting. The word narrate is taken from the Latin verbal stem narra, which is etymologically similar to para, which means, and the root narra actually means to report or tell. Parable. A parable is a succinct didactic story in prose, rhyme, or verse which illustrates important lessons or principles and sometimes uses symbolic allegory to illustrate a point. Now, parables are often sometimes quite spell-like, because anything that's done in prose, rhyme, or verse is normally written for energetic quality, for spell casting quality. And we've, of course, taken you through that in previous Dragonology episodes. And this picture over here is the Rembrandt version of the Prodigal Son. I've actually seen the original of this in the Rembrandt Museum. Okay, chorus. Okay. A chorus is a group of performers who comment with a collective voice on the dramatic action. Now, a chorus contains a minimum of 12 performers. It can contain as many performers. I think in Greek theatre, ancient Greek theatre, they used to have up to 50 performers, but I've seen productions where they've got like 120 in the chorus. And these people normally speak in unison together, and they represent the collective voice. And normally they're masked. Normally they're quite inobsequious figures that don't have a specific personification or characteristics. And that's a very distinctive reason. The role of the chorus has never been fully explored or explained by historians or teachers or people who've kind of examined Greek theatre. But if you start to look into what the actual function of the chorus was, it really was there to give initially a second or a third character type voice to Greek plays, but also
it was initially developed from my observation. I haven't found this proof in any other book except through actually having looked at the role of the Greek chorus in the actual plays, and that is to be the moral voice, the voice of the dragons or the gods guiding the course of the action in a way, the narrators. Okay, that's what they did. They narrated the play. The chorus narrated the play. And of course, you find the OR root of or, which is the serpent etymology root, serpentine etymology, as we've discussed in previous Dragonology episodes. And this starts to get interesting because an actor or an actress was referred to as a thespian. Now, the word thespian has two serpentine etymological roots in it, and we've discussed this last week. Obviously, the and the SPI, which is the root of spiro, which means dragon. Okay, and of course, SPI, spy. And of course the eye symbolism and to look, the watches, that's all dragon sort of themed etymology. And of course SPI, spiral. There's a lot of very interesting words that are associated with SPI or spy or spiro root etymology. And of course, again, thespian, an old Greek term that references an individual now commonly known as an actor or an actress. So an actor or an actress, the original Greek term thespian, has two serpentine or dragon etymological roots in it. Very important. And that gets important as we go through this and you see how tricksy this all is. Now, thespis, again, two serpentine etymological roots. The and SPI. Thespis was said to be a being who first appeared on stage playing a character other than himself. I beg your pardon, I've got a spelling error over here. I did hope Biggie would catch that for me. Love you, Mubs. Basically, this is supposedly the birth of what became theatre. And theatre is named after Thespis. Okay? So again, two serpentine etymological roots in the word thespis. Very interesting. And now this becomes very interesting because what you see is the mask symbolism comes up a lot as we start to work through popular culture. And also thespis is, although thespis was described as being the origins of the theatre, there actually there is plays and work traced further back than thespis. But what is interesting is the way thespis, or this being called thespis, is described as being a person that appeared on stage playing a character other than themselves. Now, try not to think of that as an actor or an actress. Try and think of that in what we've come to understand in terms of dragonology as perhaps someone who's possessed by an entity or being who has reptilian walk-in or is themselves perhaps a dragon in a human form. They play a character other than what they really are. Okay, see how this all plays in? So the clues in etymology, as I've already discussed, thespis, okay, the and the spiro root, spiro referencing the spiral, the caduceus obviously being the best example of the spiraling serpents, and theoi being the gods, the being the gods or dragons, and it's a root word of theophania or theophany, which means the appearance or disappearance of God. All right, so the Orphic mysteries. The religion of ancient Greece is interrelated to theatre, okay, inextricably provable fact. Theatre was basically rituals involving movement, dance, chants, music, and singing, which evolved into more complex storylines, usually relating to and in honor of the theoi, gods, or dragons, which incidentally are all the same thing, just different ways of referencing the same principal beings, theoi, gods, or dragons. All right, so Greek theatre. overkill subject for me, having studied performing arts. We did this to death. So we learned, when we learned all this, we didn't learn it in its fuller context, understanding what the etymology means. You just kind of learn it as fact-based, which isn't really factual at all, because it doesn't tie things together in a way that's comprehensible and that tells a true and full picture of what these things are really all about. And I've referenced a beautiful picture over here of an amphitheater, and these amphitheaters are scattered all over the Mediterranean and near Middle East, and they're quite impressive structures, really. And you have to ask yourself, when you see such effort going into the creation of buildings, and some of them are built into natural hillsides, natural amphitheaters, but there are just so many of them. The prevalence of them is actually quite not unlike the prevalence of ancient temples and churches. And to put so much effort into building something, you must know it must have great importance. What is the importance of something like this? It is important to control people and keep them under control if you're rulers or royalty, keep them paying taxes, keep them subservient. And that is done with a lot of propaganda. And before television and magazines, of course, what we had was art and theatre and sculpture. So Greek theatre started to flourish from around the 7th century BC, 6th century BC, was really the height, going back into the 5th century. It really came into its own as an art form. The city of Athens, which became a significant cultural and political and military power, was the center of theatre in ancient Greek times, and where ancient Greek theatre was institutionalized and became part of a festival called the Dionysia, which honored the god Dionysus. Now, the city Dionysia was just a phenomenal thing, really, and lots of playwrights used to compete in competitions. And the ones who usually won were usually the ones who wrote propaganda that were most supportive of the ruling powers. And, of course, you get playwrights like Sophocles, and of course, the name Sophocles has a serpent root word name in it, Ophi. So, he's one of the most famous surviving playwrights of his time. And as I mentioned previously, I actually performed in a Sophocles play called Antigone, playing the lead role of the king Creon, simply because I went to an all-girls school. So I had to play a man's role, and a very interesting play. And I learned a lot. And still remember huge parts of the script you do when you've got to learn these things off by heart. But basically, that particular play was written by Sophocles and was one of 3 tragedies which would form a collective. Each playwright would submit 3 tragedies, a comedy, and a satire into the competition, which formed part of the city Dionysia, which was the festival of Dionysus. And basically, the plays that were most favorable of the political elite were normally the winners. And often playwrights who took a chance and wrote things that were even slightly critical of the powers that be were often killed. And we shall go on. That's a familiar theme. Those who dare to speak out and make a point that points out the true nature of the enslaving and ruling powers are normally killed. And this carries on through the theme of cult culture. So Dionysus is known as the god of grape harvest, winemaking, wine, ritual orgies, sodomy, and pedophilia, all performed under the guise of religious ecstasy in Greek mythology. And of course, when Greece was invaded by Rome and Romans took over all the Greek gods, they renamed and relabeled, went through an epic rebranding process. And of course, the same was done again when Jesus came along. And Dionysus became known as Bacchus under the Romans. And then when Roman pantheism was replaced by Roman monotheism, Bacchus was symbolically represented as Jesus. So the word tragedy, Greek tragedy, is rooted in the word tragos, meaning goat, and tragos, like melody. The second part of melody is ode, and that means song. So tragos means goat, song. It's a mixture of tragos and ode to get tragedy. And very important to point out to you, this is where you start to get these pictures of the god Pan. You can see him here with grapes, okay, tying him back to Dionysus over here, which you can see the grapes. And there's one more thing that the grapes and grapevines are representative of, and that is red wine. Now you start to think of the Cup of the Covenant or the Holy Grail, which obviously had the red wine, which is supposedly symbolic of Jesus. And we do touch a bit on the Cup of the Covenant and the Holy Grail symbology at the end of this. But basically, wine was symbolic of the holy, royal, ruling Porphyrogenitus dragon bloodline. And of course, that's why it's associated with the god Pan, who of course over here is depicted with horns and is also the most goat-looking of all the gods. And in fact, try not to get distracted, we've seen this picture before, but goat song, the term pantheism, as you can see, Pan, I'll point that out now, but the, obviously the root word the, dragons, rulers, or royalty, stems from the goat god Pan. Pantheism, the term which specifically means the opposite of monotheism, which is pantheism is many gods. Monotheism means one god. So if you're monotheistic, you worship one god. If you're pantheistic, you worship many gods. And then they talk about the pantheon. They talk about the home of the gods, plural. And of course, pantheism stems from the goat god Pan. So the actual reference to a genre of multiple god worship is rooted in the goat god. So just to show you how important goat gods and goat worship comes to, and why it's important is because the entire genre of a particular theming actually refers to the goat god Pan. And just to give you an example of all things related to Pan and what they're really about, sadly, very sad when you, and I'll get into that in a minute, but hymns to Pan, I rave, I rape, I rip, and I rend, everlasting world without an end. That's the hymns to Pan that was often sung at what we call Orphic mystery gatherings. And we'll get into discuss a little bit about that. But when you start to think of things like Peter Pan and how that relates to children, J.M. Barrie, who wrote Peter Pan, was actually a pedophile himself, and really sugar-coated the whole Peter Pan legend or myth. It's typical of Disney, by the way, to get hold of a story like that. All right, so let's start looking at Greek theatre terminology. And we were taught all this stuff in school. Little did we know what the words actually refer to. And we'll take you through these words and their elusive meanings, because we've already covered off some of the root words in previous Dragonology episodes. All right, scheme, which became scene or scenery. And that refers to this building over here, which is the scene behind the proskenion. Okay, and that proskenion is the foreground of the set. So this is the scenery and this is the foreground, skene and proskenion. So skene would be behind the proskenion. Pro just simply means the scenery that's at the front of the scenery that's behind. Okay, so you can see where the word scene came from, skene. And then you come down to theatron, and of course theatron has the the word on, and it's talking about the seating area, of course, where the spectators would sit. And then you've got, of course, we spoke already about chorus and the OR root words, but parados or paradoi in the plural refers to the area where people entered the staging area. And as you can see, it's just a little passageway there, okay? That's the paradoi, and is normally held up by columns. And we talk about what the columns were in last week's Dragonology. Please go back and check if you want to check those roots out. But basically, parados or paradoi refers to these two entranceways where the actors paraded past, or the performers in the theatre or the theatre ritual. That's where they came past. They paraded past in through the parados or the paradoi. And then, of course, you have the orchestra, which uses a serpent root word or, and you may notice there's no instruments or people playing instruments in this orchestra. So what happens in this orchestra? Well, in the center, you've got this kind of tessellated Masonic looking tiles. And in the center of that, you've got the altar. And AL, of course, being a root word, it's the Arabic transliteration of il and L, EL being the Hebrew, il being the Latin, and AL being the Arabic transliteration, all referring to the same thing, which is the quality of light, of the Elohim, of the angels, the biblical angels. Again, just to bring that up bigger so you guys can have a look at this, because we're going to go have a look at some of this etymology and where this goes now. All right, so again, the theater, the seating area, the parados, where the actors came in parading past, paradoi being plural for both of them, the altar in the center of the Masonic tessellated tiles, the chorus, you can see them standing around there, narrating the action, what's going on, telling everybody in the theater what is happening on stage and what to think, what to believe. The chorus were incredibly important. They were we were even taught this in school, the social conscience. I don't know how much of conscience they have when they've got altars in the middle. We know what happens in altars, but that's the purpose of the chorus. Okay, now the word feast and festivals. The word festival originates from the word feast. Ritual feasting on flesh of the sacrifice of either animal or human was part of ceremonial ritual traditions. And when I Googled a picture looking for feast, I was interested to find this one happening particularly in a Porphyra Gentius royal chamber. If you notice, it's purple. The royal chamber is always purple. And if you're purple born, you're born in the royal chamber. And this is a feast going on in the royal chamber. I just Googled medieval feasts, and this is what I came up with. Interesting. The same themes keep coming back. The purple chambers, where the feasts happen, obviously, to maximize the energetic potential, you would have it in a purple room because purple has the highest vibrational frequency. And of course, parados and paradoi refers to the root word parade, I beg your pardon, transliterated or evolved into the word parade, which has the root word para in it. And a parade is often very much a part of ritual ceremonies. A parade is a procession of people, often in costumes, often accompanied by music, usually marking some kind of celebration or ritual, as with, for example, the Chinese New Year parade, where they like to get their dragons out. Okay, orchestra. Talking about the orchestra. Now, in Greek theatre, the orchestra didn't have instruments in it, but or is a serpentine root word, and orchestra actually originated with the Greek god Orpheus, who's also credited with being the inventor of music, and we get onto that in a second. Orchestra is, in today's terms, normally thought of as an ensemble of instruments, usually led by a conductor, and the word orchestra is obviously taken from a name of the area within Greek with where the musicians sit, but in Greek theatre, it is where the sacrifices happened. And it's the area where the altar would be placed, okay? The central part of the orchestra, the altar was in the middle in Greek theatre, okay? And just to give, this obviously a sacrificial altar. We get a lot of these here in Holland. They're called hunnen beds. They're kind of stone stacked on top of each other, and all they were really, I think, were sacrificial altars, as an example of something of that nature here. But the central part of the orchestra or focal point in a church from where a sacrifice sermon is normally offered is referenced as an altar. Okay. And we're talking about orchestra coming from the god Orpheus. Orph, root word, serpentine etymology here, okay? And it's referenced in ancient texts as orphan. So Orpheus is often referenced as orphan. Able to charm all living things with his music, including animals and stones. Now, we also spoke about cymatics, how music can influence and often change the shape of things, or how it interacts with the particles around us. The Orphic mysteries are still practiced today within initiated circles and include practices of human sacrifice and orgiastic feasting. As we've already spoke about, feasting and festivals. And here's a lovely picture by, I think it was William Blake, of Orpheus playing on his lyra. Orphan, as I spoke about, being the other word for Orpheus, often generally refers to children without parents. And this is a little scary. This is where it starts to take a bit of an unfortunate turn, because you start to realize that really orphans are considered nothing more than dragon food, because that's why they're named orphans, why they're given that name. More and more stories keep emerging about cult ritual abuse in orphanages, schools, and churches, particularly those associated with the church. All religions are rooted in cult ritualism. And these stories are just too numerous to go over them. Actually, it's very difficult for me to talk about this. And I get very upset when I start reading through this stuff in the news. And you start to see just how these children are preyed upon in the most horrific ways in these supposedly church-run or cult-run orphanages, I should say. This brings us on to some of the things that have been in the news in the last few years. Jimmy Savile, of course, was a UK celebrity who sexually abused and murdered children in orphanages, and specifically used to visit orphanages and children's homes. And he described himself as the first ever disc jockey, also referenced as a DJ. Okay, now DJ gets interesting because that is a serpent root etymology. We start to look at that in a second. But notice orphanages also has the root word orph in it. The DJ is present in the word jinn, okay? Jinn, or jinn with a J, the D fell away after a while, so transliterated, but it is taken from the Semitic noun jinn, meaning serpent, okay, referencing a Arabic-looking angel. Normally, the serpent always turns up in these depictions. You always just got to look for them. The wings, typical. But the Arabic classification of an angel is a jinn, meaning serpent. The DJ, very interesting. When you say the j sound in Egyptian hieroglyphics, it's represented as the resting cobra. The DJ, Egyptian hieroglyphics represents the phonetic sound of DJ, the resting cobra. Interesting that. And of course, the golden cobra is the symbol of the Theban priesthood. And we spoke about Thebes last week when I started to touch on, actually, the play of Antigone, written by Sophocles, was set in the city of Thebes. Hail the suns, the city of seven gates, city of Thebes. And of course, in the Egyptian context, the Egyptians also had a very sacred city known as Thebes, which was home to the Theban priesthood. And if you actually go to Wikipedia and you Google the Theban priesthood, this is what you will find. And I'll read through this. It says, whilst not regarded as a dynasty, the priests of Amun at Thebes were nevertheless of such power and influence that they were effectively the rulers of Upper Egypt from 1080 to 943 BC, after which their influence declined. By the time Herior was proclaimed as the first ruling high priest of Amun in 1080 BC in the 19th year of Ramses XI, the Amun priesthood exercised an effective stranglehold on Egypt's economy. The Amun priests owned 2/3 of all the temple lands in Egypt and 90% of her ships, plus many other resources. Consequently, the Amun priests were as powerful as Pharaoh, if not more so. One of the sons of the high priest, Pine-Gem the first, would eventually assume the throne of Egypt for almost half a decade as Pharaoh Susenes I, And pine gem. Interesting, the DJ sound in there. Not by accident, folks. So, starts to get funky. Let's have a look at some etymology. The root word, as I said, the golden cobra, all right, is a symbol of the Theban priesthood. The word colubra is the Latin word for snake. If we separate the word colubra up into cobra and lu, so you take the lu out of colubra and you have cobra and lu. So let's look at where the lu turns up. The lu root. The lu root is present in illuminate, referencing light again, and illuminati. Okay, the lu root turns up in the famous root that we spoke about last week. Try not to get too distracted by the picture for the meantime, folks. The Kulu, Kolu, Kula root that we spoke about in columns, Columbus, and Columbia is where we find the lu root. So that root gets broken down even further. The Kolu root gets broken down one more time. Just have a look at the lu, okay? The Latin root word jaculus, meaning serpent, is the root word of ejaculate. Dracula, obviously, as we spoke about last week, this is where you find the Kula root and it appears in the word Dracula. And of course, the Kul root appears in the word cult and culture, which is the first 3 letters of the Kulu root. So you start to see how all these words interweave into a tapestry together. All right. And everything, as I said, we started off with culture. We've come back full circle already because everything in Dragonology, and I spoke about this last week, there are symbols within themes, within symbols, within themes. Now we always come back to a similar, familiar point because this is the way it works. If you're not coming back on yourself, you're not following the right clues. You always find the same things coming back over and over again, as represented by the Ouroboros. Everything comes back full circle. We're already back full circle again. You probably find we come back full circle a few more times before we get to the end of this presentation. Just like you always come back to the creational myth in the Garden of Eden. You always come back full circle on yourself. All right, organs. Spoke about this again last week. Let's think of organs in 2 parts here. First, you have organs of the body. We spoke about the colon last week. Obviously has the kolo root in it and is the organ of the body that looks the most like a serpent. And organ, obviously, is a musical instrument. And you normally find these in churches. And these are normally made by initiated people who had the knowledge of sound and the power of sound, which, of course, this sort of thing wasn't passed on. That knowledge is not passed on to people who are not initiated. And basically what organs are in the musical context are large musical instruments normally made of a number of pipes, and they're often used in church services or ritual ceremonies. And certain frequencies achieved by organs are said to be able to invoke spirits or dragons. Spirit and dragon, obviously Spyro being the root of spirit. And people think, this is, you've lost the plot, you've gone too far. But I always say you just have to look to the etymology to see where the evidence is very evident. We spoke about para as a root word. Now, the project, the virtual organ project, the virtual pipe organ project is known as Sonus Paradisi. And this is a project which they are electronically recording all the sounds of these ancient organs throughout Europe. So that's what this project is known as, Sonus Paradisi. It cannot be that you got a certain time root word turning up again if organ actually didn't mean what it means, which is referencing something that summons the dragons. Anyway, just think about that. All right then. So music, the organs obviously referring to music. We're going to move this up, bump it up to present day. The entire music and entertainment industry is predicated on the Faustian Pact. And you can see a number, almost every single famous person you can imagine here giving the one eye symbol. We'll get into that. Now, the Faustian Pact is the deal with the devil. Let's talk about what that is before we climb on. There was once someone known as Dr. Faustus who really did sell his soul to the devil. And often the devil in the Christopher Marlowe version of his play Faust is referred to as Mephistopheles. Now, Mephistopheles has obviously got a serpent root word in it. Mephistopheles is the name of the dragon or demon or jinn or angel, whatever you want to call it, featured in German folklore and made famous in the story of Dr. Faustus. And as I say, Dr. Faustus was actually written as Faust by Christopher Marlowe. And I tell you, I would, if anybody is out there and feels like sponsoring the making of a very interesting biographical, biopic picture, I would really like to do a film about Christopher Marlowe, because this is one interesting dude. Christopher Marlowe, typically known as an English poet and playwright and translator of the Elizabethan era, born the same year as William Shakespeare, 1564. And, well, when he was supposed to go and study to become, of all things, a Roman Catholic priest, but was recruited into what was at that time the secret society or intelligence networks, which have always been run by the church on behalf of, for the crown. Actually, the crown, you know, is an agent of the church, of the Vatican, in servitude to the Vatican as well. And he wrote the story. All of his pieces were actually written as he was a typical, what we consider today, a spy, a British Secret Service agent, and he was educated enough. And now in those days, you couldn't get an education. You couldn't read and write unless you were very wealthy, or you went to the church and went to the Jesuits and they educated you. But like the majority of the people could not read and write. And the fact that this guy could actually translate means that he was highly educated and used as an asset of the crown. And he wrote Dr. Faustus, the Faust story. And what he was doing effectively was he was telling the story of his own life, what had happened to him. Christopher Marlowe used Dr. Faustus as an allegory of what he had done, which is sold his soul to the dark side, the devil, Satan, whoever you want to call it, the dragons, or to serve as a propagandist, agent, asset of the crown and writing propaganda. And he actually wrote Dr. Faustus, or Faust as it became known, I guess, to leave clues behind. And much like, as we'll go on to talk about some other people who dare to write the truth, Christopher Marlowe, for me, was one of those who kind of, in the end realized what he'd done and left some clues behind, and basically is the 16th century equivalent of a modern day Stanley Kubrick. Very similar story. Did some dirty stuff and ended up not making it. He was sacrificed, assassinated due to revealing too much in his writings. And Dr. Faustus told the story of how a guy sold his soul to someone called Mephistopheles, and Mephistopheles in the end comes for his soul. And there's, ironically enough, I actually know one line. It's, "Now hast thou but one bare hour to live, and then thou must be damned perpetually." Now, Christopher Marlowe, like William Shakespeare, wrote in iambic pentameter. Not easy to do, okay? I dare anybody to bring me iambic pentameter written in as many plays as Shakespeare did, because basically iambic pentameter basically describes a sentence which has 5 beats in it. And a beat is defined by actually having a neutral vowel by a stressed vowel. So you would have, for example, "Now hast thou but one bare hour to live," okay? And that's 10 beats, and those beats are divided up into stressed and unstressed consonants. And the unstressed consonant is the neutral sound. It's the neutral sound And basically they wrote like this because pentamic writing is spell casting. It's spell binding. That's why they use the pentagram. All right, very, very important. The number 5 is very important to these people, very powerful number. So Christopher Marlowe, highly initiated, and of course, he broke the syntagma, the arrangement. He wrote too much in his play Dr. Faustus and was taken out. So let's get on to talk about what this deal with the devil really is. And for anybody, the price of fame or the deal with the devil goes back a very long way. It's not a new concept, okay? In order to make it in the modern day entertainment industry, one can sell their soul to the devil. That's, in fact, the easiest way to make it. In fact, the only way to make it. For those of you who want a little bit of homework, and you may remember a film in the 80s called Angel Heart with Mickey Rourke, when he was still still good looking, and Robert De Niro. And a very interesting film indeed. And it's a story about a man called Harry Angel who sold his soul for fame. And the guy called Lucifer, or Mr. Louis Cypher, is actually played by Robert De Niro. And Robert De Niro's character comes to claim Harry Angel's soul because Harry Angel sold his soul for fame. Very interesting film. Tells a lot. This film was released in the 80s. I highly recommend you guys go watch it. If you can download it from somewhere, check it out. Really worthwhile checking this film out. And it gives you an idea of this whole concept of selling your soul to the devil. And it's a very real concept. And you kind of have to make this pact. And it's referenced as the syntagma or the arrangement. And there's conditionalities to this arrangement. And some of them can be pretty harsh. They can include the sacrificing of a loved one or of other things. Another film which I recommend, we're talking about the price of fame here, all right? When these celebrities sell their soul for fame, this is the kind of thing they have to engage in, the most debased and disgusting behavior. I highly recommend you guys go check this film out as well. It's all in Italian. It's called Salo, or 120 Days of Sodomy. Released in 1975 and 1976. And the guy who actually made this film, Pier Paolo Pasolini, was murdered shortly after making it, because it really does describe the true sick nature of what the elites get up to. And this was actually set in, I think it was the World War II, German World War, sort of around there, because there's a lot of sort of uniforms and army uniforms and stuff. And it's a bunch of elitists who basically go and kidnap a bunch of children from local villages, take them to a mansion and proceed to make them bark like dogs, get on their knees, sodomize them, rape them, and, you know, make them eat poo and all sorts of things. They torture them, they murder some of them, in the most horrific ways, and it's all very graphically portrayed. You don't even need to understand Italian to understand what's going on, because it's that graphic. So if you guys can or can stomach it, Salo for homework. And of course, they mentioned Christopher Marlowe. Stanley Kubrick, to me, is just a modern-day version of Christopher Marlowe. And he was very much like Christopher Marlowe, recruited to do the dirty work of the bad guys. An example of this is Stanley Kubrick was recruited to film the lunar space landings for NASA, which were completely fake. And he left evidence behind of this in his film, The Shining. The fact that he had, in fact, filmed the lunar landings and that they weren't real, because he was so disgusted by it. And he basically got a blank contract to make whatever film he wants in Hollywood. So he went and made this one, Eyes Wide Shut. And this is a scene from Eyes Wide Shut, which shows sort of an orgy. And you can see the guys in masks sitting around and watching. No doubt what would have been paid hookers engaging in group ritual orgies, or who knows what kind of girls these are. But basically, yeah. The story goes that Stanley Kubrick, when a story is put out, or when a film is put out, it has to go through filming. British Film Institute and American Film Institute will basically screen the film before it is put onto the circuit. And the story goes that Stanley Kubrick stood outside the theater when the American Film Institute screening body watched the film, and the screening body actually walked out of the theater after they'd watched it. Not one of them looked him in the eye. They just filed out, got into their limos or whatever else, and left. And within a few days of that, Stanley Kubrick was murdered, and 15 minutes was cut off the end of Eyes Wide Shut. And yeah, lots of very interesting information out there about the whole Stanley Kubrick story. But Eyes Wide Shut very much does tell the story of what goes on in these circles, ritual orgies and things like that, and the murder and the cover-up, and just sort of, again, how it's bubbling beneath the perception of our reality, but very much a focal point within elite circles. Cult control. We are very much, whether we know it or not, under the control of people who control us, and they practice cult ritualism. The practice of ritualism is the underpinning culture of the people who control and enslave humanity. This is a lovely David Dees illustration. You see George Bush with red eyes. I just love this. And a little baby getting butchered on an altar. This is typically the sort of things they engage in, folks. This is not hyped up. This is what they do. It's the very heart of the dark circles that control humanity, very much underpinned by a practice of ritualism and blood sacrifice of humans, including a culture of pedophilia and blood drinking and cannibalism. This has been evident in things which have been put out about places such as Bohemian Grove, and you can go, just Google it if you haven't done it already. Bohemian Grove is a place in Northern California, apparently in the redwood forests of San Francisco. And this is typical of a ritual that you'd find going on at Bohemian Grove. You can see these kind of interesting pointed hats, very common amongst cult ritualists. We'll get into talk about the many cults that are controlled and some of the costumes and things that they wear. But take note of that hat and the sort of processions that are going on here. Bohemian Grove in the early days. Dubbed the world's most powerful men's club by Edgar Hoover, the Bohemian Grove is a secret club that meets for 3 weeks every summer at a heavily guarded 2,200-acre estate north of San Francisco. Occultist ceremonies and bizarre rituals are part of the celebrations. And on the follow, I don't have the following pages. So we start to look at, okay, what is really going on, okay? And before we carry on to the next level of this information, I just want to give you a little bit of etymological significance of this, okay? We spoke last week about God and goat and good and that root of words, and I mentioned that it's not hard to see how the word devil and evil are transliterations of each other. But what's also interesting to note is that the words live and vile are the only other words, only other word combinations that you can get from these letter combinations of words. And it really is, in order for these evil people to live the lives they want to, they have to make pacts with the devil and do absolutely vile things. Let's take a look at some of the stuff and the deceptions that has been put upon humanity. Virtually all theatre, as I said, from Greek theatre all the way through, was propaganda. And even how we're taught to think of that propaganda is propaganda, because it's all lies. The Shakespeare deception is a good example of that, because William Shakespeare was alleged to have written 38 plays and 154 sonnets, except the William Shakespeare that was born to Anne Hathaway in Stratford-upon-Avon had no formal education, left no manuscripts behind in his will, and his children were completely illiterate. That's because in the 16th century, if you wanted to be educated, you pretty much had to go to the Jesuits. There was no formal education. In fact, it was, the Middle Ages and medieval times is known as the Dark Ages. They very much sucked the reading and writing out of public circulation and relegated it to the clergy and upper classes to keep everybody enslaved and in servitude. So people didn't know what the hell was going on. Who got educated? Education stroke indoctrination only became compulsory at the beginning of the 1800s, when education was developed for the process, for the purposes of creating people to fulfill certain roles made available through the process of the Industrial Revolution. To turn us into perfect little worker bees, we had to be indoctrinated or educated to fit, if you want to be a mechanical engineer making these things that work in factories or, to build steam engines, there's got to be a certain amount of education that comes with that. So, as I said, if you wanted to get an education and you weren't of the elite or of the clergy, you could go to the Jesuits if you had a fair amount of money and get a Jesuit education. And the Jesuits still control education and indoctrination today. The Jesuits control all the intelligence agencies of the world, which in turn control all mainstream media. So I say the Jesuits have controlled education and indoctrination for hundreds of years, and they also control all cults. And when I start breaking down the power structure of the pyramid of power, which we'll go into in another lecture, we'll get into explaining how the Jesuits control all cults. But they most certainly control all culture through media, through theatre, through ritualism, as we've already covered off. So who was William Shakespeare? And the plays written by Shakespeare. And here's another film for you guys to go watch if you haven't done already. Lots of homework for you before next week. The film Anonymous, which was just absolutely splendid. And there's a lot of clues in that script. Whoever wrote the script of Anonymous is also an initiated secret society member, because they refer to royalty as dragons in this film. Can have a little listen out for it. And I must just say, the performance given by Rhys Ifans was completely stellar. I was blown away. Didn't know Rhys Ifans was capable of such phenomenal work. But according to the film Anonymous, it was Edward de Vere, the 8th Earl of Oxford, who wrote the works attributed to William Shakespeare. Interesting, because this is where it starts to get funky. Really good book if you got a chance to read it, The Dragon Seed. And according to this book, The Dragon Seed, written by Prince Nicholas de Vere von Drakenberg, the de Vere bloodline, or the root name de Vere, is found in the word Merovee, also known as the Merovingian bloodline. So Edward de Vere, the 8th Earl of Oxford, so de Vere, okay, he's a royalty, 8th Earl of Oxford, is related to Prince Nicholas von Drakenberg, a de Vere, and they are in turn descended from the Merovingian bloodline. And Merovingian is also known as Merovee. And Prince Nicholas de Vere von Drakenberg actually is alive today and has written several books explaining the hereditary bloodlines, the fairy bloodlines of the House of Vere, Were and Colocyn, including the dragon descent of Jesus from Satan, the secret genealogy and ancient lineage revealed through this book is just incredible. It takes you through the Melusine mythology, and everything that I had gone and researched, I pretty much found in this book, spoken by someone who supposedly is a prince dragon. Interesting that. So, I mean, this is this Prince von Drakenberg is supposedly one of these dragons, shape-shifting dragons who eat children and whatnot. And he has written this book. Huge resource, guys. Go read it. Very interesting. So just to bring us to the point of this particular note, Vere is the root of V. It's just the R that's been removed. De Vere, the root of V, forming the root of Merovee. And the mer is also a serpent root word, which we've discussed in last week's Dragonology when we discussed the root of mermaid. And of course, if you've read the book, a lot of work for you guys to do, a lot of homework. Holy blood and Holy Grail. The Holy Blood and the Holy Grail. According to this book, the Merovingian bloodline is descended from Jesus and Mary Magdalene. Now, the dragon seed actually says here that the dragon descent of Jesus Christ. Okay, so this book here, Holy Blood, Holy Grail, also states that Jesus was descended from the Merovingian bloodline. It's two different books. Now, what Holy Blood, Holy Grail never does, it doesn't ever touch on the serpentine or dragon side of things, okay? The dragon seed most certainly does, but in combination, you actually have to read them in combination with each other to get a full picture of what's going on here. And of course, the Da Vinci Code based a lot of its themes on this particular book, the Holy Blood and the Holy Grail. All right. Brings up the question, was Jesus a dragon? Of course, if you believe what is written in the Holy Blood and the Holy Grail, and you believe what is written in the dragon seed, chances are it's very likely. But you don't have to read those books to understand what's going on. You just have to look at some of the basic things which you can research for yourself in just a few minutes. For example, in the Bible, in John chapter 3, verse 14, it says, as Moses lifted up the serpent into the wilderness, so must the Son of Man be lifted up. And this is the story of the brazen serpent, and it turns up often in artworks as a serpent wrapped around a cross. And I reference John a lot, and we come back to John. I'm actually going to do an entire lecture on the story of John, because the etymology of John and the significance of John in relation to serpentine etymology and dragons is huge. It's also John 1 verse 1 that talks about, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Interesting. It all comes back to the same thing. Remember, everything comes in full circles. And if you have a look here, St. John, the evangelist, is typically always depicted holding the cup of the covenant, or the holy cup with supposedly blood in it, or wine, but usually it's supposed to represent a sacrificial, sacramental cup which he drank from, and usually always depicted with a serpent either winding around the stem of the cup, in the cup, or on the cup. So this is a typical picture of St. John, is with a chalice of blood or wine, red wine representing blood, and the serpent. So what it's representing is the serpentine bloodline. And that's what the Holy Grail represents. Okay? So Holy Blood, Holy Grail actually represents the serpentine bloodline. So I hope you guys are starting to see how this all ties into each other. Okay. Again, we come back to the roots, because this becomes interesting. The Kulu root, we asked earlier the question of, was Jesus a dragon? Okay, was Jesus a dragon? This gives it away for me the most. Okay, Kulu, Kula, we spoke about that. The Lu root being the root of Kulu, and of course Kula being the root of Dracula. The Kulu, Kula root is again evident in the Latin words Kulu, eaculus, all right? And the Latin word eaculus means serpent, which in turn, okay, is the root of immaculate, as in immaculate conception. Mary had an immaculate conception. Was Jesus a dragon? Yes, of course he was a dragon. It tells you right there, Jesus' conception was the result of an immaculate conception, a dragon conception. It's all in the words. Eaculus means serpent and is the root of immaculate. Now, typical depictions of Mary. Now, let's have a look at some of the symbolism associated with Mary. Okay, let's start from the top. Normally, always with a halo or an aureola surrounding the whole body, a solar halo, okay? Or standing on a moon with usually a serpent and an apple. Interesting. Often with a cloth over the stomach depicting that she was pregnant, okay? And sometimes spangled with stars, star-spangled crown. Very interesting. Turns up in goddesses like Europa, So those are common themes that associate with Mary. The only thing we don't kind of have here are wings. Okay. Bringing this up to the present day, we're talking about the pact with the devil. This is one of the unfortunate prices people have to pay, is you will have fame till a certain time, and then your soul is mine, and that time will come when you're at your peak. And we are normally at our peak at the age of 27, which is why you have such an exorbitant amount of musicians and famous artists who die at the age of 27, including people like Robert Johnson, Janis Joplin. Oh, we'll go through the list. Amy Winehouse, some very interesting people. Kurt Cobain. Let's take a look at the list. I mean, it just goes on. And this deal with the devil goes very far back in history. Okay, it's Christopher Marlowe wrote the play of Faustus in the 16th century, and Dr. Faustus came before the time of Christopher Marlowe. All right, so it's known about this deal with the devils, known about all the way from back then. These are famous musicians from 1892 already. All right, who have supposedly made this pact with the devil, and then obviously when the devil came for the soul at the age of 27, they went. And Robert Johnson being one of the most famous people, he openly admitted to selling his soul to the devil, and one of the most influential guitarists of our time. And let's see who else is very well known here. Brian Jones of the Rolling Stones. And of course, the Rolling Stones have a famous album called Her Majesty's Satanic Service. Then let's have a Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, Jim Morrison, and there's another page of very interesting people. Kurt Cobain, Neil Zapata, Christian Puff. Let's have a look on this page. Of course, Amy Winehouse, Nicole Bogner. Lots and lots of musicians, and just page after page of this stuff. And then the other musicians who, when they break the syntagma, they realize what it's all about, like Christopher Marlowe did, okay? Like some of the other people, like Stanley Kubrick did. They perhaps use their platform to tell the truth, all right? They stop putting out the vile, horrific nastiness they're supposed to be putting out, the propaganda, the sucking people into cult culture. John Lennon was one such person who basically used his celebrity status to promote ideas of peace. And in so doing, he breached the syntagma, which is the arrangement. Okay, the holy syntagma, the arrangement. Just to give you an idea of what the Beatles were into, this is the cover of the album, Yesterday and Tomorrow, and you can see pieces of meat and babies, dolls with their heads pulled off and all dirtied and bloody, dirty, battered dolls, arms and raw meat hanging all over them. Very disturbing. I don't know what that has to do, anything to do with music, but they clearly are trying to make a point here, and quite gruesome and vile, really. But what's interesting is on the album of the cover of Sgt. Pepper, you have a picture of Aleister Crowley, okay, which you can see over here. Very interesting, that. So just to kind of give you an idea of the Beatles' influence, and when John Lennon decided to break the syntagma and start using his celebrity status to sing for peace, I mean, one of my favorite albums of his is the one that's got Give Peace a Chance, Hey Jude. Lots of very chilled, mellow vibes, all about bringing peace. And they didn't like that. They killed him, assassinated. Because people are meant to sell evil. You sell evil or else. And a good example of one of those people as well, who did the same thing as John Lennon. One of the most talented people of our time, and completely used and abused and sucked dry by the music industry, programmed into all sorts of nastiness, abused from a young child, himself programmed to be an abuser of young children, but just ultimately a victim of the music industry. And you know, when they started to publish all the stuff about him and children, is because he started to turn and started to sing songs such as Heal the World, okay? And basically, they started him off with horrific things like Thriller and Michael Jackson, oh, he's bad. They want to sell darkness and badness. That's what's cool and groovy. We want to degenerate society. You know, that's what they try to sell us in cult culture. Michael Jackson was one of those celebrities who were Faustian pact-bound, you know, and when they go against a dark agenda, they're usually killed. And he was murdered. This is the true price of fame, folks. And you know, is it worth it? This is it. You know, a lot of people think that, oh, yeah, I want to be rich, I want to be famous, but the things that these people are made to do. I showed you Salo, the film that you should go watch, 120 Days of Sodomy. Most of these celebrities are doing that. They've been debased and demoralized, degenerated, and made to do things like that. Have sex with animals, eat feces for fame. That's what you got to do. You got to get into these initiated ritualistic circles, and they will totally strip you of your dignity and humanity to break you down, to get you to sell their filth to the world under the guise of culture. They break down people so much and they control people so much that they actually started to create perfectly undetectable, mind-controlled slaves in the form of MK Ultra mind-controlled slaves. And please do check out the research by Fritz Springmeier, who I have interviewed, and talks about how to program a completely undetectable MK Ultra mind-controlled slave. And the most famous one of all, for me, was Marilyn Monroe. She was a product of the Jesuit-controlled CIA MK Ultra mind-control programs. And she basically is a cultural icon that was introduced introduced to the world, and one of the first actresses to do a nude scene. And you know, at the time that she was alive and famous, I mean, there were much bigger stars than her. For example, Elizabeth Taylor. Yet she's become far more famous than Elizabeth Taylor after death, and there's a reason for that, and that's because she's been pushed so much by the Jesuit-controlled media, the images of her, and really because she was the one who introduced sex kitten programming to women to sexualize them. And to prove that Marilyn Monroe was created, owned, and controlled by the dark agenda, by the CIA-controlled Jesuits, by the military-industrial complex, okay, you have a look at Marilyn Monroe's identification, which is a Department of Defense. She was a military-industrial complex asset, okay? You only get one of these IDs if you are a soldier, a CIA agent, or asset. And of course, this is after she was married to Joe DiMaggio, Norma Jean Baker. You see DiMaggio is the surname here. Joe DiMaggio was a baseball player, himself a cultist, a ritualist. And I'll get onto sporting culture next week. But remember this because it's important. And of course, the sexual programming is very evident, and it's often intergenerational. And I used this particular set of pictures to illustrate that, because what you've got here is second-generation entertainers. Miley Cyrus being the daughter of Billy Ray Cyrus, and Robin Thicke being the son of actor and comedian Alan Thicke. And it's no accident that Robin Thicke is put in black and white stripes. That's a symbol of programming and mind control. They do that, the stripe, black and white stripes and black and white tessellated tiles. Black is white and white is black. Complete perversion, complete diversion of all that's good, of all that's moral, to everything that's unnatural and profane. And that's what it's all about. That is the name of the game of culturalization. And I don't need to say too much about these pictures. I think they speak volumes. Beg your pardon. Illuminati symbolism used by artists. The most commonly demonstrated symbol exhibited by celebrities and artists, which indicate their alignment with the dark agenda or cult program, is the demonstration of the all-seeing eye. Of course, Jay-Z puts his hand up like this and calls it the diamond symbol. And they do it in all sorts of ways. You know, they're sneaky, the hair over the eye, you know, lots of different ways it's done. But ultimately, it's all a symbol referencing the same themes. And they're all doing it. They're all telling you that they've sold their soul for fame. All these people, all these celebrities, all these cultural icons, all these people that we look up to, that we supposedly aspire to, that are put in front of us to make us believe that we've got to be like that. Interesting. Aleister Crowley, as we spoke about earlier, appeared on the Sgt. Pepper album cover of the Beatles, said, this is where it gets interesting. He talks about secret chiefs is Aleister Crowley's term for the preternatural entities which direct the process of humanity for ends that are usually beyond the ken of mortal men. The secret chiefs are at least the grade of magus or magus templi, may or may not be in human form, depending on their own needs at the time, and are utterly unknown to the rest of humanity, except in the very rare times when they find it part of their plan to reveal themselves to one person. The secret chiefs are possessed of immense powers called the Ophidian vibration. I've referred to this again and again. The Ophidian vibrations, which allow them to insinuate themselves into any desired set of circumstances. These powers allow the secret chiefs to induce a girl to embroider a tapestry, so inspiration, okay, or initiate a political movement to culminate in a world war, all in pursuit of some plan wholly beyond the pursuit or the comprehension of the deepest and subtlest thinkers. All right, and this is from Thelemopedia. All right, and Thelema is obviously the cult of Thelema is Aleister Crowley's cult that he set up. And notice in the Thelema is the THE root as well. So we talk about here, okay, so secret chiefs could induce a girl to embroider tapestry. Talk about inspiration. Where did these you know, celebrities that sometimes Jim Morris talks about, the spirits would take him over and, you know, they were possessed, and sometimes the music would just flow through them. This theme, it's very interesting because here we have the muses that come up in Greek mythology and stuff. And the muses are said to be the daughters of Zeus or Jupiter. Zeus obviously being the Greek incarnation, which became Jupiter under the Romans, which became Saint Peter under the Roman Catholic Church. Okay, and there were 9 muses, all water nymphs. Water nymphs were also known as mermaids, as we've already spoken about the root of myrrh. And again, you see the winged muse giving inspiration to someone playing the lyra, similar to what Orpheus played. Interesting stuff. Always the same symbolism. So there are 9 daughters, and the 9 is very important. We spoke about L and 11, and the 9 turns up again in the Lord of the Rings, because the evil Lord Sauron, and Sau being the Arabic word for light, Saudi Arabia, and it's a root word of light. Okay, we talk about the Lord of the Rings and the big all-seeing eye wreathed in flames, which is light again. But Lord Sauron had 9 riders in black or ring wraiths, which were supposedly the king of men who were given rings and fell to darkness and were enslaved by them. Okay, so basically they were given power in the form of these rings, and then they became enslaved to the great Lord, which is what happens when you sell your soul to the devil. It's all allegory, folks, and all symbolism is used in the Lord of the Rings. So, yeah, makes perfect sense because J.R.R. Tolkien was, in fact, a 33rd degree Freemason. And then, of course, we've spoke about this particular wall as well in a previous Dragonology lecture, which is the Sacred Nine Dragon Wall in the Imperial Palace in China, which depicts the 9 sons of the dragon, which is supposedly seeded the emperors of China. Again, rulers, royalty, and dragon are inextricably linked. But it all brings it back. And what we will be dealing with next week, of course, is the whole cult of ball sport and various other aspects. But just so you know, to point out the balls over here, okay, also known as dragon pearls, they become very prevalent in the cult of ball sport or ball sport, as I like to call them. But we'll get into that, as I say, in the next round of this. So that is all from us this week at Dragonology, and we, of course, are trying to get the Encyclopedia of Dragonology published, which is the Encyclopedia of Dragons. But we go on to ball sport next week in episode 4, which takes place on the 16th of April 2015, 9 p.m. British summertime. That's London and Morocco time, 10 p.m. European time, which is the time it is now here in Holland, where I am. But of course, we can't publish this book without a little bit of support. So please, guys, support independent media and do go onto Conscious Consumer Network's homepage and click on the donate button, which is in the big red heart, and support independent media and support the publishing of truly independent research told from the point of view not of the dominant culture, but from those who are genuinely seeking and putting together the truth. And, of course, putting together this information for you wonderful folks to learn and hopefully gain something from. Hope this has been informative. Thank you for your time and attention this evening. My name is Melvi, and it has been a pleasure to speak with you all. Take care and see you next week. Bye-bye.